In June, Pokemon Go Battle League received a pretty big meta update called Forever Forward. Now, as of right now, we're about halfway through the Forever Forward season, and we've had about a month of uninterrupted Open Great League gameplay. So today, I figured what better way to try and figure out where we're at in terms of the Open Great League meta than to do a tier list. Now, big thanks to Caleb Peng. He was the one who ended up compiling all of these Pokemon together in the tier list. Now, we're going to be using the categories of S tier being top meta, A being meta, B being fringe meta. I would say anything in S, A, or B are probably Pokemon that I would say I think it makes sense to play. C, probably bad. B, bad. E, hot garbage. For this tier list, I'm specifically going to be rating them with the Pokemon's playability in the Go Battle League. I'm not going to be considering their competitive usage. For a lot of Pokemon, it can be similar, but some Pokemon will perform better in competitive than in Go Battle League and vice versa. So just for the sake of simplifying things, I'm mainly going to be considering their play in the Open Great League. All right. Let's do it. We got a lot of Pokemon to get through, and it looks like our first Pokemon on the list is not a Pokemon that I'm a particularly big fan of, and that is going to be Wigglytuff. Now, Wigglytuff has one of the best typings you could ever ask for in the game, Fairy plus Normal. This allows Wigglytuff to have incredible roll compression, or at least it did in the past, where it was the Fairy type that was able to shut down Ghost types, and that definitely made it the best Fairy type to use. However, time and nerfs have not been kind to Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff used to have incredible neutral matchups, but with the Charm nerf, Wigglytuff's neutral matchups are honestly pretty terrible. So I think for Wigglytuff, I'm going to be putting it into the probably bad tier. Wigglytuff could still be used, and people will still use it because people like running fast, low pressure, heavy stuff in the Go Battle League, but it's very mediocre if you ask it to try and win a neutral matchup, and it's forced to basically just rely on its typing. I think there are many other Fairy types that I would use before Wigglytuff, so I think that C ends up being a pretty appropriate spot for it. Next up, we have Dewgong. Dewgong, another former meta titan. Dewgong used to be a top meta pick, and even with a rework to Drill Run giving it faster pacing, Ice Shard is just such an incredibly, impressively terrible fast move that it really limits Dewgong's viability. I would put it in a similar range with Wigglytuff, where could you use it and just play well and play better than your opponent and probably have success? Yes, but I think it is overall a hindrance to have it on your team. I think it's below Wigglytuff, but I would still put it in C for probably bad. Next up, we have Kanto Marowak. Now, Kanto Marowak is another one of these Pokemon that has received a pretty heavy nerf. Mudslap was nerfed. Kanto Marowak used to be an S tier Pokemon, but I don't think Kanto Marowak was hit as hard as Wigglytuff. I do think that Kanto Marowak is still pretty playable, and I think it is probably the most agreeable of the slappers. I think Kanto Marowak does end up going into B for fringe meta. Kanto Marowak's coverage, having that Bone Club plus Rock Slide, Ground plus Rock coverage is just pretty good across the board, and it ends up being a rare ground type that actually has a winning matchup into Shadow Kanto Ninetales, as Shadow Kanto Ninetales pretty consistently destroys almost any other ground type. But an ability to survive a Shadow Energy Ball is a pretty big plus for the Marowak. Next up, we have Galarian Weezing. Is Galarian Weezing a Pokemon that you should use over Wigglytuff? I would say yes. I think Galarian Weezing is a better Fairy type than the Wigglytuff, just because Galarian Weezing can have some interesting neutral matchups, whereas Wigglytuff really struggles in that capacity. I think that Weezing is probably going to end up in the B tier. Now, am I putting it above or below Marowak? I think it actually ends up going slightly below Marowak, which might be a controversial take, but I'm definitely of the belief that I think that with the amount of Pokemon that have repeatedly been buffed, and there's been very few nerfs, I think the largest category we're going to have by far is going to be this B, fringe meta. There's so many Pokemon that you can use and have success, and I feel like those kind of end up fitting, for the most part, in B. So I think we'll end up putting that in B tier. Next up, we have Feraligatr. Feraligatr, another one of these Pokemon that has been S tier at one point in the past, but I do think that Feraligatr's best days are behind it, which might seem a little bit crazy. I don't think it's bad. I think Feraligatr is still strong, but I would not put Feraligatr into the meta category. There's so many Pokemon that just outpace it now. There's Pokemon that outpace it and win charge tech priority against it. So I don't think Feraligatr is a bad Pokemon to put on a team by any means. However, I think I'm probably putting Feraligatr into the very top of B tier. I don't think I can quite put it into A tier, just because even though it does have some interesting matchups, it is not very consistent into Shadow Kanto Ninetales, Licky is obviously going to be S tier, and it is pretty horrendous there. So I think Feraligatr ends up going right at the top of B. It looks very weird to have Feraligatr and Marowak right next to each other, but rest assured there's going to be quite a few Pokemon in between those to help kind of widen the gap. Next up, we have Furret. I think that Furret, it's had better days than it has right now. Furret is not the most consistent Pokemon currently. Even with Brick Break, the fact that Pokemon like Tinkaton can still just absolutely destroy you really makes life difficult for it. So I think Furret, I would probably put in the middle between these two. Furret, you can still definitely use it. You can still definitely get wins with it, whether you opt for Trailblaze or Brick Break. But I think there's just things that do what Furret wants to do better. I think Licky's flexibility definitely makes it reign supreme over Furret. Licky obviously has a lot of moveset options as well, as does Furret, but I think Licky is overall just way better positioned compared to Furret. Next up, we have Azumarill. Now, this is going to be a bit of an interesting one because Azumarill is a Pokemon that I took to Legend this season. So you might be surprised that I'm not putting it in A tier, but I think Azumarill, it ends up being what I would consider to be a pretty consistent B tier Pokemon. Azumarill is not going to be one of the best water types. It's not going to be one of the best fairy types, but it's also not a bad Pokemon to have on your team. What Azumarill does is it offers you very strong zero shield matchups, whereas you can kind of pair it with glacier things that are very shield intensive to try and get shields down. And then even if you get stuck on something like a Tinkaton, the fact that Azumarill now runs Player of Hydro Pump and is ditched Ice Beam means that Azumarill just has really, really consistent zero shield matchups, and I think there is some value in that. As far as where we put it in B tier, I think it's below Feraligatr. I think we'll definitely put it above Marowak for sure. It's definitely going above Marowak, but I think right there works, where it's another one of these increasingly large list of Pokemon that you can use, but not going to be one of the best ones. Next up, we have Forretress. Now, Forretress, man, this is a very, very strong Pokemon. It can run Volt Switch. It more frequently runs Shadow Bug Bite, but Volt Switch can allow it to have like unique coverage and play in a different way. I think Forretress, I don't think it is good enough to be an S tier. I think this is our first A tier option, which is pretty exciting to finally have a Pokemon above B tier, but Forretress is just so ruthlessly oppressive with Sand Tomb and Rock Tomb, the double debuff moves, whether it's debuffing your defense, debuffing your attack. It's so good at just farming things down that when it comes to team building, a lot of people will try and make sure that they have a lot of resistances to Bug Bite. Although even having a resistance to Bug Bite doesn't mean you win the matchup. I'm looking at you, Empoleon. I'm also looking at you, Tinkaton. So I think Forretress is definitely worthy of an A tier rating. I don't think it's towards the top half of A tier. Well, actually it might be. We'll see how many Pokemon end up in A tier. But overall, I think it is a pretty worthy contender in A tier. Next up, we have Dunsparce. Dunsparce, in my eyes, is like the definition of B tier, probably lower B tier. I think Dunsparce probably ends up right around here. It's definitely towards the back half. We recently saw Exeggutor actually hit, I believe it was like top 5 or top 6 in the world running Astonish Dunsparce, which is allowing it to compete in a new and different way to what we've seen before. It did get better pacing this season with having slightly faster drill runs, but unfortunately, even with that, not getting same type attack bonus on anything can kind of hold it back. So it's a serviceable Mon, it's not a great Mon, and I think B tier ends up fitting it quite nicely. Next up, we have Steelix. Steelix, another Pokemon that has been stronger in the past. I think that Steelix, it's probably going to end up in B. This has just turned into Home Slice Henry sits down for an hour. I have no idea if this is going to be an hour. You can check the runtime. I can't check the runtime. I'm actively recording this. And just puts 90% of Pokemon in B. I swear there's going to be Pokemon not in B tier, but I mean, Steelix just fits, right? Steelix, there will periodically be moments in a meta where everyone is very weak to Steelix, and Steelix is uniquely very strong into a lot of Fortress teams, just because people will oftentimes use Fortress as the anti-steal, and Steelix is the steal that can kind of beat up on Fortress. So I think Steelix, it probably ends up like here. I think maybe right around Azumarill territory where it's fine to use. You can get wins with it. It can be a key contributor to a team, but there are things that do what it wants to do better. Next up, we have Medicham. Now, Medicham, this is going to be tough. I think Medicham is actually pretty underused at the moment. Medicham's bulk can actually be of great annoyance to a lot of the top tier Pokemon. So I think Medicham, I would probably want to put it right around here, but it might even sneak into A. Maybe just because I have like 7 Pokemon already in B, I might put it in the back half of A, and then if we need to adjust it later on. But considering what I'm expecting to be in top meta, I think Medicham is actually underplayed right now, which for a while it was underplayed. And then I believe it was Houston. It had a huge showing. People played a ton of Medicham. Then Medicham kind of faded into obscurity. But I think Medicham is actually probably underexplored right now as an open Great League option. Its bulk is just incredibly strong. Even though it will have its limitations, like really not liking ghost types, neutrally being able to spam out Dynamic Punch every 10 turns, and having that kind of stat product means that Medicham is always going to bring at least some kind of value to a battle. So Medicham, I think we're putting it in A tier, but probably in the back half of A. If I could put like a large gap between these two, I would, but obviously if I try and put it over here, it just drags it into there. So we'll just have to fill out the gap with other Pokemon as we go. Next up, we have Dusclops. Now, Dusclops, ooh, is it a bad Pokemon? It very well could be. I think Dusclops, it's not horrendous. There was a day a few weeks back when there were quite a few people who were using Dusclops. And that honestly caught me quite a bit by surprise because I wasn't really expecting to see Dusclops, and I ended up being kind of weak to it. I think Dusclops will probably end up in the probably bad territory. Dusclops, when it was the premier ghost type, its niche was it was the ghost type that could beat Diggersby, because Diggersby back in the day was on quick attack. Now Diggersby has mud shot. Even Diggersby, I don't think is particularly strong right now either. It kind of loses to everything. But even if you did run into Diggersby as Dusclops, you would end up losing that matchup. So I think Dusclops probably ends up with its stats. I don't think we can ever put it in D, but I'll say maybe bottom of C. I think Dusclops is very mediocre and not a Pokemon that I would look to put on my team. Bastiodon has suffered a massive fall from grace. Bastiodon is another one of these Pokemon where even its neutral matchups are pretty bad. Even if you wanted to run kind of a D-Gen fast move pressure heavy rock type, Carbink already exists, and Carbink, I would argue, does what Bastiodon would want to do, but substantially better. So as far as Bastiodon is concerned, I think Bastiodon is not even in C tier. I think Bastiodon might be our first D tier because, man, Bastiodon is just a sad mon right now. I don't even really know what it does. I think what it does is lose and just be a far inferior Carbink. Next up, we have Gastrodon. Now, Gastrodon is sadly very playable. Gastrodon, much like Marowak, did get its Mudslap nerfed, but Gastrodon was the recipient of the Earth Power buff. So now, every 5 Mudslaps, it has a very efficient Earth Power. I think Gastrodon ends up in the B tier. It's going to be probably above Marowak, I would say, just because Gastrodon, it doesn't have the coverage of Marowak, but that Mudslap Earth Power combination is just extremely efficient, and Gastrodon can operate in a zero shield scenario, whereas Marowak definitely more relies on heavy shield investment. Okay, next up we have Drapion. Drapion, oh man, that's a Pokemon I haven't thought about in quite some time. I believe Axon managed to hit Expert with Drapion this season, but hasn't really played it since. I think that kind of sums up a lot of what you need to know about Drapion. Is, can it work? Yes. Should you use it? Probably not. Like, would I rather use Galarian Weezing or Drapion? I think I'd rather use Galarian Weezing. So I think it ends up going even further down than that. I think maybe bottom of B. Next up, Hisuian Electrode. Hisuian Electrode is an incredibly powerful Pokemon. It offers amazing coverage. We finally have a real Grass Electric type. Grass Electric has always been an extremely intriguing potential core breaker coverage duo, but all the mons with Grass and Electric coverage were just bad. But with the Energy Ball rework, now Electrode every 10 turns is spamming out either a Wild Charge or an Energy Ball. This means that a lot of the Flying plus Ground cores really struggle against Electrode, and having Wild Charge to spam out neutrally means that even if you're in a matchup where, let's say, Grass is resisted and there's a Flyer, bam, you have Wild Charge. So it's very rarely walled off, with the exception of like a Clodsire, but even Clodsire is still hitting for neutral damage with Energy Ball. I think Electrode is substantially better than maybe a lot of people might consider it. I think Electrode is actually above Forretress. Hisuian Electrode is one of the most flexible and one of the strongest Pokemon that you can run. It's exceedingly rewarding for using very good energy management, and I think Electrode is just an absolute terror. I would argue that it's one of the Pokemon that I have a pretty bad win rate against. If I'm not running Kanto Ninetales, then I'm probably getting absolutely whooped by Hisuian Electrode. That Pokemon, when piloted well, is just absurdly strong. Next up, we have Lickilicky. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Lickilicky is going into S tier. Lickilicky is the most neutral Pokemon in the entire meta. And in the Go Battle League, the fact that a lot more Earthquake Lickilickys are cropping up means that now you have hesitation to counter switch something like a Tinkaton, because what if it's an Earthquake and then I lose the vast majority of my health bar? So the fact that there's now moveset uncertainty, I think even further strengthens Lickilicky's stranglehold on the Open Grade League meta. It is the premier safe switch. It is hyper neutral, hyper flexible, and there's a reason why it's used on so many teams. It's just absurdly consistent. Next up, we have Dusknoir. Dusknoir has suffered a pretty significant fall from grace. On new system, Dusknoir, it really does not appreciate being an Astonish user, because the longer turn duration moves you have on new system, on the new system compared to the old, the damage registers one turn later. So it registers on turn 3 instead of on turn 2. And that's a big problem when you have longer turn duration fast moves, as it allows opponents, for example, to, let's say, if you're leading a 2-turn fast move into a Dusknoir, you could throw your 2-turn fast move, switch, and the Astonish damage would actually land on the Mon you switch in, rather than the Mon that threw the fast move and pivoted. And that's a problem for Dusknoir, is Dusknoir can kind of be abused by really good players. So I'm very torn on where to put Dusknoir, because I don't think Dusknoir is terrible. Can you use it? Yes. And unfortunately, I've said those words before, and I think that means it's probably going in B tier. I think Dusknoir probably ends up like here, maybe, where I would use Azu over Dusknoir. Obviously, they operate very differently, but I think there are just better things than Dusknoir. Dusknoir really likes being able to either Shadow Punch or Dynamic Punch and farm something down, and that's a lot more difficult to do. So it's forced to kind of not really be able to play to the play style in which it performs the best. Next up, we have Cresselia. Now, what does Cresselia even do in this meta? I think the answer is really not much. Cresselia is, oh man, even with a buff to Psycho Cut kind of recently, Cresselia just feels very dismal. Cresselia, I mean, amongst the mons that could be good here, Cresselia is not going to have a fun time against Electrode. It's going to get shredded by Lickilicky, shredded by Forretress. The only real mon it would target would be like a Medicham, and that's not as common as it should be. I think Cresselia ends up... Ooh, do we put it all the way down in C? I think it ends up all the way down in C. I don't ever see a reason to run Cresselia. I think it just gets kind of walled off by everything. So in my eyes, it's just a complete miss of a Pokemon. Next up, we have Unova Stunfisk. Unova Stunfisk, ooh. This is a Pokemon that offers insanely good, like, roll compression. The fact that Stunfisk can kind of break up a lot of those, like, steel plus flyer cores that normally are very difficult to break means the Stunfisk will always have some value. However, Stunfisk gets absolutely obliterated by Shadow Kanto Ninetales, so I don't think Stunfisk can go in the S tier. I think Stunfisk probably ends up in A, which might be controversial. People might think it belongs in S, but I think the fact that even Lickilicky can fight back against it quite nicely, Kanto Ninetales is just going to straight up beat it, I don't think it can quite go into the S tier. So it's still a very strong Pokemon. It's still going to do very well for people, but I do think that it has taken a bit of a step down from its heights. Next up, we have Diggersby. I think Diggersby is atrocious in this meta. And that might seem like a bit of a crazy statement, but I think as we fill out more of SNA, I think that statement will end up making a little bit more sense, just because it loses to so many of the top mons. Now, in the Go Battle League, you'll frequently see teams that kind of disrespect Diggersby lead, and they can get away with it because if you try and run Diggersby, you're going to run into mons like Kingdra, you're going to run into mons like Kanto Ninetales, you're going to run into the Altarias of the world, the Hisuian Electrodes of the world. It's just really tough out there to be a Diggersby. Diggersby probably belongs in B. I'm strongly debating putting it in C tier. I just think Diggersby is spectacularly mediocre. But would I run Diggersby before I ran Gastrodon and Marowak? Probably. Okay, so maybe it does belong in B. Maybe I'll put it like here, kind of towards the middle of B. It's higher than I want to put it, but it does have an insane stat product. But it kind of just loses to everything, so I think that is probably fitting. Next up, Carbink. Oh, I hate how good Carbink is this season. Carbink is going to end up very, very high on this list. Carbink plus Hisuian Electrode is kind of the perfect core pairing. And most Hisuian Electrode teams do not feature a Carbink pairing, but I think that duo is very difficult to try and core break with the exception of like a Clodsire. I think that Carbink, it is the premier like fast move pressure mon in the entire meta. It hasn't ever really been nerfed, whereas a lot of the other ones have. This is unfortunately easily going to end up in A tier. Carbink is, I think Carbink ends up probably here. Carbink versus Electrode, there's some debate there. I think putting them near each other makes a lot of sense though. I think I will put it above Electrode. I won't be happy about it because I prefer Electrode a lot more than I prefer Carbink, but try to be unbiased, so we'll end up putting it there. Toxapex, I think it's terrible. I think even though it's very bulky, it is horrendously slow. Even if you end up trying to utilize the fact that like it shuts down Ninetales, it should in theory have a good matchup into Licky. I still think it's just going to end up being very underwhelming because of how insanely slow it is. You can get away with being slow if you have like a massive stat product, but also pretty good moves, and Brine is just horrendous. So if you're in a matchup where poison is resisted, Toxapex is just completely useless. Whereas something like a Carbink at least has Rock Slide and Moonblast, and both of those are pretty good moves. Whereas Toxapex, I just don't really see the benefit to running it. I think this ends up in like D tier. I think Toxapex is pretty spectacularly bad. Maybe over Basti, but that's still really not saying much. Next up, Annihilate. Annihilate is never bad, but I don't think this is a particularly amazing meta for Annihilate. I think Annihilate, I think it ends up in like upper B. I would run Metacham before I ran Annihilate in this meta. I think maybe we put Annihilate like here. Maybe above Azu, but below Steelix. Annihilate obviously does have different flexibility with low kick versus counter, Ice Punch versus close combat. So there's a lot of different ways to run it. I feel like B works, where it's not bad. You can use it and have success, but I would definitely not list it as a meta Pokemon in my eyes. Next up, Clodsire. Clodsire, kind of a sneaky buffed Pokemon that went a little bit under the radar, whereas Clodsire kind of does what it's always done, but now with extra Earthquake damage. Clodsire has absolutely like zero attack. It doesn't really do much damage, so getting extra base power and Earthquake was actually pretty meaningful. It's a really meaningful improvement for this Pokemon. I think Clodsire probably ends up towards the back half of A, maybe like here. I think I would put Electrode and Fortress above it, but I think Claude is above Medi. I feel like that kind of fits. Next up, we have a Sliggoo. Sliggoo is a very underplayed Pokemon because why would you run it when Kingdra exists? Kingdra does what you would want Sliggoo to do, but better. However, I don't think that means that Sliggoo is bad. Sliggoo is a very playable mon, but I think Sliggoo, again, what do you know? We're looking at B tier here. Absolutely shocking stuff. We are probably going into the B tier. Let's say like the bottom of B tier. I feel like that fits. Just because you can use it and it would be fine, but there's just something that does its job better. Next up, Galarian Zapdos. This will not be in B tier. Zapdos gets its long-awaited new fast move, but unfortunately, Zapdos is very frail. It very much relied on trying to be able to like fast move pressure things down before it got fast move down in return. Low kick gives it pretty solid pacing, but if your opponent has shields to hide behind, they're just going to shield once or twice, farm you down, and then your entire Zapdos is gone. I think Zapdos, it ends up pretty low here, probably down in C tier. Zapdos is unfortunately pretty unnoteworthy. Next up, Galarian Moltres. Ooh, Galarian Moltres, I wouldn't put it in A, would I? Because Moltres, it's not really played right now. I think the meta is very hostile to it, but I also don't think it's bad, which means it's going to end up in B tier. Moltres, But like, no, it's definitely better than Daresby. Maybe like here. Whereas there are better flying types than Galarian Moltres right now. There are better dark types than Galarian Moltres, but if you use it, you're still going to have pretty good success. Now, something that I would really like to see is when they consider doing the big move update in the fall is nerfing the vast majority of the meta. I think kind of a reset of this insanely high power level could be an interesting way to try and approach it. Now, will they do that? I assume probably not, because that would be a very aggressive undertaking rather than just nerfing a few things and then buffing like 15 of them. But I feel like there is a point of diminishing returns where you buff everything to where everything is playable, and then suddenly the meta is insanely wide open and it's a lot more difficult to team build. And I feel like that's kind of the area where we're approaching now, where you no longer have perfect cores. Instead, you're going to have to build teams that are going to be ABA weak to something, and then just try and win the games when you don't encounter the thing that you are core broken by. Next up, we have Malamar. Malamar is awesome. I love Malamar. Malamar is terrific. Malamar versus Hisui Electrode. I think it's going over Hisui Electrode, which would put Malamar maybe like here. Malamar is just all around great. Malamar does very, very nicely at kind of just being able to land a move, farm something down. If you're on the regular, you can actually just straight up beat Shadow Kanto Ninetales. The Shadow is a pretty rough matchup in a Shadow Kanto Ninetales, but the Shadow can do a lot better in certain matchups, like when it's answered by Tinkaton, the two Shadow superpowers basically KO, versus Altaria as the Shadow. If one of the two are Shadow, either the Altaria or the Malamar, you can get a Psywave breakpoint. So I think both Shadow and regular are playable. I tend to prefer the Shadow, but if you are worried about Kanto Ninetales, regular Malamar, I believe, just straight up wins the twos there. Next up, Quaquaval. This is the Alex Brownie Pokemon. I'm going to put it in hot garbage. I don't know what Quaquaval is doing. I think the answer is not a whole lot. Next up, we have Sandslash. Sandslash is a Pokemon that is creeping up in usage a little bit. It's basically the people who use Sandslash double water, and then there's not really another Sandslash team. It's almost always Sandslash plus Seaking or Kingdrug, and then a Mantine in the back, because you have to have two waters in the back, because otherwise you're guaranteed to lose to Kanto Ninetales. Honestly, even the Seaking plus Alolan Sandslash teams will typically lose to Kanto Ninetales anyway, because Seaking doesn't really beat Kanto Ninetales. But I don't think it's meta. I think it is usable. It's probably towards the upper half. Like, it's definitely better than Furret, maybe in and around here, like in a Gator range. Alolan Ninetales. Another one of these Mons where, can you use it? Yes, but there are just better ice types. Like, I struggle to see the advantage of running an Alolan Ninetales when something like a Celio exists. Now, Celio, we haven't gotten to rank yet, but Celio is going to be very high up there. Celio is incredibly, incredibly strong. I think Ninetales just ends up kind of being in this... I guess we could just make a glut of ice types that are worse than Celio in B tier. So we'll just kind of put it there. Hisui and Quillfish. Oh, man. This is just bad. I think we're just putting it in bad tier, down with Toxapex. Just kind of leaving it there. I'll put it above Toxapex as an act of kindness. Sunny Castform. I think we're just putting this also in bad. So Sunny Castform down there. All right, we have Wormadam. This is the trash Wormadam, isn't it? So trash Wormadam technically should be the best of the Wormadams, but I think that is still really not saying much. There was a bit of time in which trash Wormadam, I believe it was, I can't remember who it was. It was some APAC player managed to get very early legend last season with trash Wormadam. I believe they ran Primarina, trash Wormadam, and Aegislash, which is one of the craziest legend teams I've ever seen. Just absolutely bonkers team. Had no business getting to legend as early as it did, but somehow, the player was just incredible, so they were able to do so. But man, I still think it just goes in bad. I'm not using Wormadam. Galarian Stunfisk. I think Galarian Stunfisk is a lot like Medicham in terms of it's very strong, but kind of underexplored in the meta. Galarian Stunfisk has very, very strong neutral matchups. It does unfortunately get kind of overwhelmed by the insane pacing of Kanto Ninetales, but outside of that, it's very, very strong into so many of the good Pokemon. So I think putting it in and around Medicham tier feels accurate. I think it is underused, similar to Medicham, but I do think it is very, very strong. I could put it in B, but man, I would use G-Fisk before I broke out Sandslash and Gator. So I think we'll end up putting the G-Fisk there. Next up, Ledian. Oh man, Ledian, it can be fun in limited metas. Like in Retro, Ledian was genuinely really enjoyable, but this is an open Great League tier list. Take Ledian to the trash heap. We are putting Ledian down in bad. Unfortunate. Next up, Blastoise. Blastoise starts with B. It's the definition of fringe meta. Blastoise is never bad. This season, some Blastoise comps that have had success have featured like an Ice Beam Blastoise with a Jumpluff and a Clodsire. And Blastoise, it's always just a very consistent source of water damage. It's good bulk. It can opt between Ice Beam and Skull Bash. In a Jumpluff meta, typically we'll prefer Ice Beam, but Skull Bash is always playable if it ends up being more of a water-heavy meta. But I think Blastoise probably just ends up getting thrown in here, where there's going to be a lot of waters in B because there's a lot of good water types right now. Blastoise, I would use Gator over it, but I don't think Blastoise is escaping its fringe meta fate. Next up, Primeape. Primeape, I think, is escaping fringe meta. Primeape is extremely strong. Primeape is just able to kind of ramp up and make life really uncomfortable for a lot of Pokemon. You can opt for Shadow versus Regular. You can opt for Ice Punch versus Close Combat. With Ice Punch, it ends up being like a pretty interesting Altaria plus Empoleon breaker. I think it is a pretty safe A-tier Pokemon. I think it probably ends up here. I would put it above Malamar, much to my chagrin, as I prefer Malamar, but I think that's probably fitting. Corsola. Corsola, I feel like we can just kind of put it here too. Corsola, it's just the premier ghost type. Corsola is extremely bulky. It has a good matchup into the Shadow Kanto Ninetales. It can hold its own into Tinkaton. It's not a winning matchup, but at the very least, it can do okay in that matchup. And it can kind of just do what it always does, which is neutrally outbulk things. The thing it has to watch out for, of course, will be Licky. But I think Corsola is still very much doing Corsola things this season. Swampert. Oh, man. Swampert. I really want Swampert to be a playable Pokemon. Unfortunately, I really don't think that it is. Swampert just feels very mediocre. Although I guess a lot of mediocre Pokemon have ended up in B. Like, we have a Sliggoo there. Is Swampert that much worse than Sliggoo? Swampert, I guess we'll put it... If we're being kind, we will put it above Sliggoo and put it there. Where, like, you could use a Swampert and have success, but there are just better Mud Boys that exist. And I think that is definitely going to hold it back. Okay. Next up, Talonflame. I think Talonflame is pretty awful. The changes to damage registration are a huge, like, tremendous negative for Incinerators. Whereas I just don't really see an upside of putting Talon on your team. I guess the upside would be it walls off Kanto Ninetales, but I think there are other things that can do its job better. But Talon's kind of a sad man right now. I think Talon probably ends up in kind of the washed bin of rejects down here, where maybe like top of C tier. But I think Talon it's really not doing much. Corviknight, oh buddy, you are going straight to B tier, aren't you? Corviknight, well, Corviknight always feels kind of underwhelming, but now there's the Shadow that I have to consider. And the Shadow can play very differently and hit a lot harder. So I can't just rate it on the regular. I think if it was regular, it'd probably end up towards the upper half of B. But I think the Shadow is really interesting and might push it into A. Because Corviknight's defensive resistances are very helpful. As well, it is a Pokemon that can be used to bait out Kanto Ninetales without being catastrophically destroyed by it. Because if the Kanto Ninetales ends up no-shielding a payback, that does a ton of damage. So, you know what? I think I've talked myself into Corviknight a bit more. So I think Corviknight might end up sliding into A tier. Maybe we'll put Corviknight like here, right behind Fortress, ahead of Claude. I feel like that works. There's quite a few different steel types there. I think Corviknight, well, I'd probably run Fort before Corv. I think Corv, probably just due to its flexibility, gets the nod over the Fisker. I think that makes sense. Morpeko. I lost to a lot of Morpekos today. It made me very sad. I just kept getting cooked by Peko. Peko is definitely fringe meta. Peko is always going to be a playable mon, and it's going to be very feast or famine. There's always going to be some teams that just rely on never seeing a Morpeko, and if you see it, you're just going to sweep them and fully win. But I don't think it is meta by any means. Okay, next up we have Lumineon. Lumineon was really interesting in NAIC. I think Lumineon, it is really, really not good as far as the Open Great League goes. Lumineon, I think we can probably chuck into like bad. I don't think, although, hold on, is it worse than a Zapdos? Probably not. So I guess it'll end up going into C. Except we have Swanna. Swanna is actually pretty playable. Swanna has actually recently hit rank 1 in the entire world on the Go Battle League leaderboards, although that was largely due to the fact that it was paired with Licky Licky and Marowak. But I think Swanna is playable under the right conditions, and I think Swanna is going to end up being a pretty solid B tier option. Would I play Swanna before Galarian Moltres? Actually, yes, I would. So maybe we put the Swanna there, like right before the Galarian Moltres. That feels right to me, right around Blastoise range. All right, the Toad. The Toad is the premier mud boy. It's very easy to get swept by the Toad, but it's also very easy if Toad is at a disadvantaged state to get absolutely destroyed. And I think Toad's inconsistency is what holds it back from A tier. It has awesome coverage, and I do think that in the right hands it can be very strong, but you're always having to try and ensure that you're not at a disadvantaged state. If Toad is at an advantage state, if it's up energy or up a shield, it's going to destroy you. But if it's at a disadvantaged state, the downsides are pretty rough. So I think we'll kind of put it here. We're kind of building out a glut of water types. I feel like that fits. How many more of these do we have to cover? Oh, we have to cover quite a few. Okay. We are going into some pretty rough mons here. We have a Gigalith. Gigalith is pretty terrible. I've tried it. I know some people have managed to have some very limited success with it, but the thing to note is that no one stays running Gigalith. People run it and then they end up ditching it. So I think we'll just put it in bad. Starmie. Starmie's probably usable. I think Dune managed to hit expert with Starmie. The Starmie probably wiggles its way into B tier. Maybe we'll put it like here. Although when I ran Swampert before I ran Starmie, I think Starmie is unique enough that I'll put it up right there, but that's not saying a whole lot. Next up we have Kabutops. Kabutops is pretty bad. We'll just put that in bad and move on with our life. Kingdra. Kingdra has a strong argument to be made for S tier. I am a little bit torn by its glassiness and whether that can be good enough for S. It might end up being absolute top of A. But I think Kingdra... here. I guess we can put it here for now, where it ends up being in the absolute top of A. Kingdra, in my eyes, is just unbelievable. Water Dragon is such a good typing. It has great pacing. It has great coverage. Its moves even have great energy synergy with each other. Kingdra is just so good. Kingdra is just unreal. Big Kingdra fan, and it's well deserving of where it's placed. Pidgeot. It is a usable Pokemon in the Go Battle League, and I think that's the kindest thing that I can say about it. I think Pidgeot ends up like here. I guess the reason why I am not afraid of Pidgeot in any meaningful way is no Pidgeot player knows how to click Brave Bird. I always lead something neutral into it. They build up to 4, I no shield, it's an air cutter, and then even if they boost, I don't really care because I didn't shield an air cutter. I think Pidgeot only gets scary if you end up respecting the first move, but a lot of people just don't. So Pidgeot is never really something that I'm particularly afraid of. Next up, we have Xatu. Xatu was interesting in NAIC. Here, I think it's just bad. Qwilfish. Ooh. A Shadow Qwilfish is something that Alex Brownie has been legend pushing with recently. I hope he's able to get legend with it because that would actually be extremely, extremely cool. It probably ends up in like Drapion tier. I think like above Drapion, but not by much. It did get Shadow Ball this season, and that hits for a ton of damage, so it did get meaningfully improved. I think that probably about fits it, where it is playable. You can use it and have success if you want to. Rhyperior. This is a Great League tier list. Put it in D, and we won't think about it anymore. Fearow up next. Okay. Now, Fearow is going to go up pretty high, so we're going to have to scroll up. Fearow, definitely A tier in my eyes. Fearow is just very consistent. Maybe here, I would run Kingdra before Fearow, even though they're very different. But I feel like Fearow fits here. Fearow just has incredibly consistent damage and incredibly consistent pacing. That's really, really good. It's also very rewarding of good energy management. And outside of a Corviknight, nothing's ever really walling off Fearow. even neutrally, something like a Licky doesn't like taking the Pex into Drill Pex. So I think Fearow is a well-earned A-tier Mon. Next up, Clefable. Clefable, its coverage is interesting into like Annihilate Carving teams, but oh man, it's probably absolute top of C or bottom of B. I would definitely run this Pokemon before I ran. Man, if I have Sliggoo there, I can't. Okay, we will sneak Clefable into B. And then next up, we have the Menace. We're putting that at the top. Even above Licky. I know it's crazy, but Kanto Ninetales is the best Mon. This meta revolves around Kanto Ninetales. If you can't beat Kanto Ninetales, then you better run 2 Mons in the back that do, because you're going to be in for a world of hurt. Kanto Ninetales is the most centralizing Pokemon in this meta. Every single team is constructed either with having a Kanto Ninetales or having multiple ways to beat it. Running weak to Kanto Ninetales and having success is not really a recipe for success unless you end up getting very lucky and you're just in a meta bracket where it's not being played, but it's very frequently played as it is just strictly the best Mon. So Kanto Ninetales is incredible. Rapidash. Rapidash, it is a beneficiary of the Drill Run change. So Rapidash is probably like a playable Mon. That's probably one of the kinder things that I could say about it, but man, I don't even think this is sneaking into B. I think this is probably just sneaking into C, if we're honest. Like, it's not the worst Mon I've ever seen, but I don't think anyone is jumping for joy at the prospect of having to play a Rapidash. So, Rapidash or Talonflame? I think I'd run Rapidash first. Okay, Seaking the Fish. Seaking is a Pokemon that a lot of people love. I am actually very low on Seaking in the Go Battle League, and I want to explain why. Outside of the meme of me hating Seaking, I think Seaking, from a Show 6 perspective, has quite a bit of merit. Because with the coverage of Peck, Drill Run, and Icy Wind, you know your energy will always have at least some play, and flexible play is something that is very important in a Show 6 environment. It is kind of a safe Pokemon that you can always rely on. However, in a Go Battle League environment, the fact that Seaking does not get same type attack bonus on any of its moves, even though its energy will always have some use, Seaking doesn't really win a lot of matchups. It's an intriguing Altaria Empoleon breaker, but even that, if it's down a little bit of energy into Empoleon can actually force a shield and make life kind of uncomfortable. Even the Altaria matchup down a little bit of energy, Altaria has the ability to flip that. So I think Seaking does not belong in A tier in this meta. I think Seaking, it has its uses, but its lack of the same type attack bonus means that it really struggles against some of the bulk monsters. Like, it's horrendous into Licky. It's a water type with Drill Run that loses the Carbink. You have a really, really bad matchup into Corsola. You get absolutely thrashed, torn to smithereens by Kingdra. So in my eyes, it'll end up in B. I think I'll put it at the top of B, but I don't care how many comments there are. I'm not putting it in meta. It is not good enough. I needed to win a neutral matchup before I can put it in meta, and that is something that Seaking simply cannot do. Okay, next Mon, Gyarados. Unfortunately, Gyarados is pretty bad right now. It seems like every other Water Flyer got buffed this season, and every other Water Flyer is better. Even though Gyarados really didn't get worse, there's just better options that do what it wants to do. Gyarados probably ends up towards, if I'm being kind, the bottom half of B, but honestly, I think it's going in the upper half of C. I think Gyarados is not a Mon you want to play. Mantine is just better Gyarados right now. And if you want a more offensive water flying type, then you would just run Swanna for the insane fast move pressure. Lapras. I might be controversially placing Lapras too high. Lapras was on my legend team. I think Lapras is unbelievably good. Lapras is so neutrally strong in so many matchups. Lapras has win cons into Licky. It is a rare water type that can actually beat Kanto Ninetales. It can win the zeros into Empoleon. It can absolutely thrash Altaria with Ice Beam. It can do pretty well into regular Kingdra just because they're forced to go for Swift. Even against the fighters, it can fight back. Corsola can fight back. Carbink, it can fight back. So many of these Pokemon that are either at the top or we're expecting to be at the top, it has really nice play into. Now, I think it's not towards the upper half of A. I would probably put it maybe like Claudish range. Put it, okay. Oh, it put it in S. That was not the goal. We wanted an A. There we go. I feel like that fits. I think Lapras is meta. I think Lapras is substantially better than Seaking, just because Lapras actually wins matchups and Seaking does not win matchups. I think in a show 6 environment, Seaking is better than Lapras, but the tier list is for the Go Battle League. And in the Go Battle League, I don't think there's a reason to put Seaking on the team unless you're trying to soft lose matchups. But even soft losing matchups for farm in a 45-second switch timer, people can usually just pivot out. So I tend to view it as a less valuable Pokemon than Lapras. Next up, Dragonair. I think Dragonair will probably end up in B tier. It's better than Sliggoo, but I don't think Dragonair is still doing a massive amount in this meta. Well, maybe we end up putting it near Sliggoo. I feel like that is kind of fair. We can put Dragonair maybe like here. Near Sliggoo. It's not a Pokemon that I would personally run a lot of. I think it's fine, but there are just better dragons. So I feel like bottom of B is a fair showing for it. Next up, Lantern. I think Lantern is terrible. We'll probably put it in probably bad because at least it has a good stat product. And a good stat product at least counts for something, right? Probably doesn't count for a lot, but we will put it there. Jumpluff. Jumpluff is exceedingly strong and is very easily going to end up in A tier. I don't think it's good enough for S. Now, where in A tier does it go? Jumpluff has definitely grown on me over time. I think Jumpluff, maybe like right around Malamar territory. I feel like that fits. Jumpluff's bulk and its ability to have such dominant zero shield matchups, specifically as the regular, you can also beat Licky Licky. I think there's a lot to like about Jumpluff, and it's very consistent now into the waters, which was a big problem before. Like, it lost to Feraligatr because Energy Ball was so expensive. But now it's actually a very consistent anti-water, which is really nice, and its bulk can allow you to pair it with glassier things like the aforementioned Malamar or K9. Quagsire. I think Quagsire is very mediocre right now. Quagsire, oh man. My chat might yell at me for this. I don't know if Quagsire is A. I think Quagsire is very mid. I know that I had said earlier that Seismitoad was the premier Mud Boy. I think Seismitoad and Quag are very close here. I just am not a believer in what Quag does, which is crazy. Because on paper, looking into what's good, I feel like Quag should be good, but then playing Quag every time, it just feels really rough to use. So I think I'm going to end up putting Quag in B. Now, I realize I am probably going to get some comments in chat, and for the bot of this, some comments in the YouTube comments saying that I'm far too low on Quag. But I think Quag just ends up being very underwhelming this season. It ends up being kind of having a 3 charge move syndrome. Whereas last season, it could get away with running Aqua Tail Mud Bomb. This season, suddenly, there's a lot more strong flyers. There's the Jumpluffs of the world making Quag a lot less safe. And suddenly, you want Stone Edge. But if you give up Mud Bomb, then you're a lot less consistent neutrally. And some of the like bulky neutral matchups start to get away from you. So I think that's kind of what's holding Quagsire back. I think in and around Seismitoad feels about right to me. Umbreon. I think Umbreon probably ends up in B. It is a playable mon. Would I use it? No, I would not use it. So I think Umbreon, we'll just kind of throw that here. Murkrow. I think Murkrow is generally just bad. Although it's not right pure bad, so it probably goes into the probably bad tier. Maybe we'll put it like here. I do not think it is a Pokemon that I would use. They're just better flying types. Gligar. Gligar is another mon that is just very mediocre. Gligar, I think there's not even like a justification for putting it on your team. I think Gligar ends up pretty low on this list. Maybe like here. Pretty low in the C. I just don't think it's very good. Miltank. Well, I don't think we're switching from probably bad. Miltank was very strong in the NAIC meta, but outside of that, unfortunately, I really don't think it's doing a lot. It's just a worse Furret, which is a worse Licky Licky, so why should I care? So I think we are gonna Put Miltank. I think like here. All right, Ludicolo. Ludicolo probably sneaks its way into B. Ludicolo did get a buff this season with Energy Ball. Ludicolo is almost always paired with a Carbink, just because it needs a very strong anti-flyer. So I don't tend to enjoy the types of teams that Ludicolo gameplay like encourages, but it is a playable Pokemon. So it probably ends up in like this range. That feels about right to me. Pelipper. Pelipper did get a buff with Hurricane. I still think Pelipper is pretty bad. I just don't really know what Pelipper is doing in this meta. I think it's in the Gyarados tier of just like bad water flyer. Sableye. Sableye is easy A. Sableye, I think it's better than Corsola. Maybe like right in around Sableye, Fearow, Primeape. A tier below Kingdra, but in and around these three feels right to me. Okay. Swalot. Swalot's a sad man, unfortunately. Swalot, I don't think is doing much for anyone. I think we'll just chuck it in C and call it a day. Grumpig. Grumpig feels like a pretty standard B tier mon. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just Grumpig. So probably, where's like Gastrodon? I feel like Grumpig kind of fits in and around here. Kind of in, yeah, Noir territory makes sense to me. Altaria. Okay, we're just going to take this to S. Altaria is the premier dragon in the meta. It has amazing coverage, amazing bulk. Even against Tinkaton, which should be a problem for it, it can hit back. It also walls off Canine. Even while taking super effective from rollout, it has a lot of play into Licky Licky. Altaria is just insane. There is not really a whole lot more that I can say, other than it's just very, very good. Credilli. I really don't see a lot of reasons to run Credilli. I think we just throw Credilli in probably bad and move on with our lives, whereas there might be certain teams that you can core break, like maybe a Kanto Ninetales team with Credilli, but it's insanely slow, and I think even in its matchups where it should be good, that slow pacing can often be exploited. Milotic. Now, Milotic recently hit rank 1 in the entire world. It was the Mega Junko who was able to hit it. And that would imply that it is at least probably fringe meta. I think we'll chuck it, let's say in and around here. I feel like there's kind of like, there's several waters here. I think we'll put it, Junko's still going to yell at me and tell me it's too low, but I feel that the fact that I'm putting it in B instead of C is purely just off of Junko. Next up, Celio. Celio is the best ice type in the meta. Celio is unbelievably good, specifically the Shadow Celio. So I think Celio does end up in A. Maybe we could put Celio like here, like right behind Malamar. Shadow Celio, even in its bad matchups, like being walled against Empoleon, it can still put up one heck of a fight. I think Celio is unbelievably strong. I really, really like Celio. Walrein. Walrein sucks. I want Walrein to be good. I actually ran it on my wife's account up to finishing pretty high on the global leaderboards last season, like mid 3300s. I want to say it was like 3330 something. But man, in a Kanto Ninetales meta, if you don't have fast, super effective damage in a Kanto Ninetales, you're kind of useless as a water type. And I think Walrein is now useless. That's very tragic, as I like Walrein, but we're throwing it in this glut of water types that no one should use or care about. Shelgon. Shelgon is going to be a B tier mon. Shelgon probably ends up like here. It's better than Dragonair. I think it is not better by much. I feel like that's probably a pretty fair rank for it. Registeel. This is abysmally bad. We're just going to throw it in C and not think about it too much. Empoleon. Take me to S tier. I think Empoleon... Empoleon versus Altaria. I think I'd probably give the slight edge to Empoleon. Empoleon's defensive typing is just absolutely absurd. And I think Empoleon is well deserving of its S tier status. It's just, Empoleon's that guy. Empoleon is just unbelievably good. Its stats may not be the greatest, but it has amazing coverage. It has pretty solid pacing. great 10 turns, and very good charge stack. So all across the board, Empoleon is just a great pick to use. Pachirisu. Pachirisu is, I think, probably bad. There's several people in my Discord trying to do a Pachirisu to Legend challenge. Big shout out to them. They are actual warriors. None of them have hit Legend, and they're very good players. So the fact that none of them have hit Legend, I feel like kind of tells me what I need to know about Pachirisu, where unfortunately, it's tough out there for the little electric squirrel. There's a lot of electric resistances out there. I just don't think Pachi is really doing... I don't think it's really doing much in this meta. I think Pachi will kind of throw it there. As a kindness, I'll put it towards the top half of C, but it could easily be a lot lower. Bronzong. We're just putting that in hot garbage. Bronzong is horrendous. Hippowdon. There was a Hippowdon that actually hit Legend kind of recently, but I still don't think that moves me. I still think I'll put it in like a Pachirisu tier of like, it's an okay Pokemon, but I don't think it moves me. Well, would I run it before I ran a Swampert? I think I'd run it before I ran a Swampert, so I think we actually put Hippo there. Yeah, I feel like that works. Abomasnow. Born to be B tier. Look at the size of this B tier, by the way. This B tier is massive and only growing. We're on a 4th row. No other tier has more than 2 rows. But that's just the state of the meta right now, to be honest. Okay. Abomasnow. I think B tier makes sense. Its coverage is interesting, but there's just better ice types, even with the cheaper energy ball pacing. I was worried at the start of the season that the season would devolve into Kanto Ninetales, Abomasnow RPS, but as it turns out, there's no RPS because no one is running Abomasnow, because why would you run it in a canine meta? At the very least, if you're running Sandslash, you can potentially lose a mid-game, farm down with Sandslash, and drill run it. If you're an Abomasnow, the game is just over. That's why people don't really run it. Togekiss is kind of just pretty mediocre. I think Togekiss goes towards the bottom of B, and that's a kindness. Togekiss is probably right in and around here. There are just so many better flying types. Like Fearow is just like strictly better Togekiss. That Togekiss doesn't get same type of attack bonus on its charge stack. So it has the 10 turns, it has the super effective damage and the steals, but having fly and drill run, Fearow just clears. Fearow is just the better mon to use. So it's not that it's horrendous, but Fearow is just better. They're just better flyers. Giratina. Giratina is very playable. I think we probably put it Shelgon territory. Giratina typically runs Dragon Breath in this meta. With Dragon Breath, it can actually fight back to a certain degree against Licky Licky. There's a lot of charge move variety in terms of Ancient Power, Dragon Claw, and Shadow Sneak, but I think Giratina is very, very playable. Duat and Samurott, they were sick in the UIC. They're pretty useless in Open Great League, unfortunately. I think we'll just put them in bad and not really give it too much thought. I'll put it above Bastiodon. Crustle. Crustle is... I think we're probably staying in D for Crustle. Crustle's bad. I'll put it above Bastiodon. Emolga. Now, there's a few people who frequently hit very high on leaderboards and hit Legend with Emolga, which I think is insane. I've tried Emolga. I think it's terrible. But clearly, there's just something that they know how to do that I don't know how to do. So I think we'll end up putting it in B just purely off of those absolute lunatics running Emolga. I think we'll put it... I feel like that's fitting. Jellicent. Ooh. For Jellicent, I would run Jellicent before any of these two. I think Jellicent might sneak into the absolute back half of A. I think that makes sense to me. Jellicent is a very good core breaker into a lot of teams. Obviously, as a ghost type, it really doesn't want to see Licky Licky, but it's pretty neutrally strong into Empteria. We haven't seen Tinkaton yet, but it's very good at Tinkaton. It can survive a Shadow Energy Ball and never be farmed down by the Ninetales. So the Ninetales matchup isn't amazing, but it's still playable. And for a lot of other water types, it is not. But I think Jellicent, because of that strong defensive typing, the Water Ghost is... It is more arguable to use a Jellicent than it is to use a Feraligatr or a Seaking. Mandibuzz. Now, there's several people who make it very, very high on boards with Mandibuzz. One of them is Jason2890. So I think it probably ends up in like more Peko territory. of like, it'll core break some teams. It'll also be useless into some teams. So kind of just depends. Hydreigon. Hydreigon is a core breaker to a decent amount of teams, but I think I am not going to be as kind to Hydreigon as maybe I should here. Hydreigon can just kind of get really overwhelmed by fast food pressure, and that fast food pressure does exist. Even though I really like Hydreigon, I think Hydreigon is going to end up a lot lower in B than people might want it to. I think Hydreigon versus Giratina, I genuinely think it probably ends up like here, which is crazy. People might want to argue it's A tier, but I think that it is a lot more difficult to be a Hydreigon right now than a lot of other dragons, just because of that insane frailty. It has great pacing, and like some of the other darks, there can be certain teams that Hydreigon just flattens, but I feel like, especially with Aegislash getting worse, it is more difficult to use Hydreigon now than it has been before. Greninja. Greninja kind of feels like bottom half of Beemon. Like, I'd run Greninja before I ran Starmie, but I don't think that's saying a whole lot. So I think we'll just put that there. Florges. Ooh, Florges might sneak into A. I think Florges is very good. Florges has some moveset customization as well. It'll always have Chilling, but some Trailblaze, some Disarming, some Moonblast. But Florges can be an interesting core breaker to a lot of teams, but it's also never really going to 1v2. So I think I might end up putting Florges right at the top of B. Like, I was debating A, but man, I don't think I can justify it, because like, when in life is Florges ever 1v2ing someone? I think the answer is never. It is interesting. It kind of behaves in a Seaking-esque role, but I think it's slightly better than Seaking, so I think that kind of fits. It is spiritually a Seaking. Pangoro. Pangoro is never bad, but it's never like amazing. It's another one of these darks that relies on just like core breaking teams, and if it can't core break teams, then it's not doing much. I'd run it over Hydreigon. So maybe we put it like here. I feel like that's fine. Actually, I think there. Slightly above Galarian Moltres makes sense to me. But I think Panda, it's never horrendous. There will always be teams weak to it. So I feel like middle of B feels like a decent spot for it. Doublade, the Blade. Doublade, you're going in C tier, buddy. The typing rights checks that its mediocre stats and moves cannot cash. Aegislash. Aegislash on new system is pretty unplayable, which is unfortunate. And I'm kind of trying to rate these off of new system more or less. I think Aegislash, Mimikyu is just so unplayably horrendous for it. And a lot of the Mimikyu teams like feature stuff like Kanto Ninetales that it also doesn't want to see. So even though I liked Aegislash, I thought it was one of the best Pokemon, I think Aegislash is kind of a sad man right now. Ooh. Where do we end up putting Aegislash? This one's actually stumping me, because when it goes right, it goes so right. But man, it is kind of brutal. I don't think I can put it as worse than Doublade. I think we'll put it just above Doublade. All right, there's a Dragalge here. We can just put that in down here. It's horrendous. Aurorus. We'll just put that in bad. Klefki, the key. Klefki probably goes in C. Like, Astonish, the move is good, but I don't think Klefki is really something that people are super excited to go, oh, heck yeah, I'm going to go play Klefki in today's set. Like, I just don't really see that as something that people will be doing, because there's just better Astonish users, there's better fairy types, there's better steals. So, like, realistically, what is it doing? Not much. I think it goes in C. Probably like Miltank range. Gourgeist. Gourgeist is a sad man. Gourgeist was like an interesting core breaking individual. And now Electro just does what it does better. Add to that the fact that it's an Incinerator. And yeah, Gourgeist is down here. Gourgeist has suffered a pretty substantial fall from grace. Toucannon. Toucannon does have an elevated role on New System because it's very strong into a lot of Mimikyu teams. So I think Toucannon surprisingly will actually end up towards bottom half of B. I think Toucannon, it's a very usable Pokemon. I think kind of Togekiss tier. I think that makes sense to me. Maybe like here. Okay, next up we have the new addition to the meta, and that is going to be Mimikyu. Now, Mimikyu, not only does it have an incredibly good typing, but it comes with a built-in gimmick. Whereas for Mimikyu, you basically start the game with a built-in third shield. Once that shield is broken, the first charge stack that you don't shield does no damage. It breaks to disguise, and then your defense is at -1 for the remainder of the game. Mimikyu is pretty meta warping in the Open Great League. I would argue that Mimikyu, does it ever end up making it into S? I'm not sure, but I think it probably ends up being towards the upper half of A. Everyone is considering Mimikyu, but I think Mimikyu, right around Sableye territory makes sense to me, just because Mimikyu is very, very strong. But what Mimikyu also struggles with a little bit is the fact that people intentionally build very, very strong to it, and Lickilicky exists. Like, Lickilicky and Empoleon are not super fun matchups for it. Kanto Ninetales isn't a super fun matchup for it. So it's an outrageously strong gimmick, but its charge moves and pacing are pretty mediocre, and it can kind of get spammed to death by a lot of the good stuff. So I feel like A is fitting. That's another one that I think people say, how on earth could it not be S? I think with that justification, A makes quite a bit of sense. Charjabug. Charjabug is always bleh. It's always mediocre. The Gengar Life can use it to good success, but that's just because he's good. That's not because Charjabug is good. I think Charjabug ends up probably here-ish. Right in a Diggersby territory of like, there's just better things you can run. Why are you doing that to yourself? Araquanid. I think it is just not good. I think Araquanid, kind of throw here. That fits. Oranguru. Oranguru doesn't really do anything. I think it's very, very, very mediocre. Like, I think one could argue for B, but I can't see that argument as holding a ton of merit. I think it ends up going like here. If you want to use a normal type, there's better normals and there's better psychics. So, Oranguru, it's not really the meta for it. It's more of a limited metamon. Golisopod. Now, when I was running a Malamar team, I got pieced up by a Golisopod. However, I imagine if you led into non-Malamar things, it'd probably be pretty rough. So, I think Golisopod will probably also end up in probably bad. We can kind of put it around Araquanid tier, where there's just better bugs, there's better waters, and I imagine even the Kanto Ninetales matchup probably isn't amazing just because you're taking a lot of heavy neutral damage, and Golisopod stats, well, they're not bad, they're not incredible. Turtonator. Turtonator is a Pokemon that has actually picked up in usage in the Open Great League, which is a little bit wild to me. I think Turtonator probably sneaks in the absolute basement of B, which would put it above almost every other Incinerate user, but that Fire Dragon typing can core break a lot of teams. It's one of the few mons that can actually core break the Kanto Ninetales plus Jumpluff core that otherwise is very, very difficult to break. It has play into Lickilicky. It has play into both sides of Emteria. So, shockingly, Turtonator ends up being, despite its many flaws, a somewhat playable Pokemon. Kommo-o and Hakamo-o feels like they're the poster children for C. Let's kind of throw these here. I think Como is better, but not by much. Guzzlord. I think Guzzlord is better than Hydreigon right now, and that does sadden me. Guzzlord, to my surprise, I learned is running more Dragon Claw this season. And Dragon Claw Guzzlord, while it leaves you helpless against mons like Florges, I think if you're against Florges, you're probably in a pretty rough spot anyway, so trying to commit to being able to win more neutral matchups, once I thought it over, it does end up making more sense. That would probably also help with like bulk monsters like Lickilicky. Obviously, I'm not putting it up there. I think it ends up in B tier. We can kind of put it with this glut of dark types here and call it good. Melmetal. I think Melmetal, oh, there's actually 2 Melmetals on this list, so we just won't rate the other one. We will only use one of the Melmetals. Melmetal feels B tier to me. I think Melmetal is a core breaker to many, many teams. Did I use Melmetal before I use Steelix? Actually, yes. Steelix isn't bad, but Melmetal's insane pacing, I think, does give it an edge. I think it's just better Steelix right now. Greedent. Greedent is very fast, but very underwhelming. I don't think I can, in good conscience, put Greedent into a B tier. Greedent probably ends up in C. Let's throw it with, like, yeah, a Dugong. Thievul. A playable Pokemon. Technically, going to have a Calm Day where it gets Icy Wind. But I think Thievul is probably just, like, bad Morgrem, which in and of itself is bad Mightyena. So, I actually don't think Mightyena's on this tier list. I don't believe I've ranked it yet. So I might have to add Mightyena very quickly. So let's scroll down to the bottom. Let's get Mightyena added real quick. Look at that. We have a Mightyena now. So Thievul, I think we'll just throw it in C. That's fine. Morgrem. Morgrem is better. Like, Morgrem's defensive typing is really, really interesting. Morgrem is a Pokemon that I would enjoy trying at some point, because I imagine I probably could have pretty solid results with it. I know some people have had some pretty, like, good legend runs with Morgrem. So Morgrem, I'd probably run it before Umbreon. I think Morgrem kind of ends up towards the middle here. Like, maybe Hydreigon tier. That feels about right to me. Regidrago. It's never unplayable, but Shelgon kind of puts it out of business. Above Sliggoo, but below Shelgon. So maybe in and around here. When I tried it, it felt underwhelming to not be able to have dragon damage in at least 10 turns like Shelgon can. Winkaloon. Very bad. Winkaloon's at least assumed heyday was going to be the NAIC meta, and then we had meta updates, and then Mons like Kecleon existed, and then with the new stuff that was viable, there were suddenly a lot more flyers, and the normal type of choice ended up becoming Miltank to have super effective damage into the flyers instead of being walled by the flyers like Oinkologne. So even in the meta that Oinkologne was built to dominate, it didn't do well, so there's no reason to run it on an Open Great League team. Spidops. Spidops did get second at a regional once, but Spidops' heyday has come and gone. Spidops, unfortunately, well, it did have a good run at EUIC, which was supposed to be the Spidops meta, and then it didn't win EUIC. It was Beedrill that ended up taking it. So I think we're going to end up putting it in C tier here. We can kind of just throw Spidops down here, down with a bunch of just very washed Mons. Bellybolt in Open Great League, we'll put it down there too. Tinkaton, the final S tier. Get Tinkaton up to S immediately. Tinkaton, I think, can be an annoying Pokemon to play against because of the bait versus nuke game, but even if you end up playing it just by throwing straight Tinkaton hammers, the typing is unreal. Like, Fairy Steel is such a good typing. Its move is a Steel-type clone of Precipice Blades. There's a lot to like about Tinkaton, and even in a meta that is ruled by Kanto Ninetales, where it has a uniquely poor matchup, I think the Tinkaton, outside of the Ninetales matchup, has so much play across the board. Even with Bulldoze debuffs and up a little bit of energy, it can kind of BS its way through Empoleon. Tinkaton, very, very good Pokemon. Only a few left. We've almost done it. Dondozo, going to B tier. Not bad, but there are just things that do what Dondozo would want to do a little bit better. I think we can put it in and around here. I feel like that seems fitting. I do have a very good Dondozo. I wish it was better. Mantine. Mantine goes to A tier. Mantine is terrific. Mantine versus Jumpluff. I think I might put it slightly behind Jumpluff, but not by much. I think that Mantine can be an interesting core breaker to a lot of Kanto Ninetales teams. However, Mantine, even though it should have the edge in the head-to-head matchup against Jumpluff, loses to Jumpluff because Mantine is stuck going for non-stat twisters and Jumpluff's stats are insane. So I think for that reason and that reason alone, I'm putting Mantine behind Jumpluff, but Mantine is very good. Kecleon. Was pretty good in NAIC, pretty abysmal outside of NAIC. Like, in theory, it could be used, but there's just better Mons. So we'll kind of just throw it in here. Not really think about it too much. We'll put this with that too. Aromatisse and Sylveon. Aromatisse is, I think, like Moonblast, Thunderbolt, Fairy Wind. I think it also has Psyshock too. But I don't think Aromatisse is doing a lot for people. I think people would run Sylveon before they ran Aromatisse. Like, I think Sylveon could sneak into the bottom of B in like a Clefable-esque role, but I don't think Aromatisse is doing that. I think Aromatisse is probably ending up just firmly in C tier. We have a second Melmetal, which we don't need. Conkeldurr. I know Conkeldurr, it probably sneaks to the absolute bottom of B. There have been some trainers who have run Shadow Conkeldurr to some pretty decent results, but it is a pretty difficult mon to pilot. And finally, Mightyena. Mightyena is very, very good. I don't care for the fact that it's very good. I think Mightyena, as far as the Open Great League goes, it's probably disingenuous to put it in a place that isn't A. I would want to put it lower, but I don't think it belongs lower. Unfortunately, it probably belongs in A. I think Mightyena probably ends up going there, and thus concludes the tier list. I believe that is everything. We have done it. We can kind of go back up to S and look through it, but I feel like we've done a pretty decent job here. I feel like this, I care a lot more about the rankings from B and up rather than C and down. I feel like there's probably a pretty big cutoff in terms of the playability of Mons, maybe right around like Emolga, where the top half of B is a lot more playable than the bottom half of B. The bottom half of B, you can technically use it, but should you? I don't think so. And then there's just a whole lot of not great stuff down here. So overall, I think it's an interesting meta. I enjoy playing Kanto Ninetales. It's not my favorite Open Great League meta ever, but it's a unique take on it that will define the world's meta. So all in all, let me know your thoughts. What are you feeling about the Forever Forward Open Great League meta? Let me know what you thought it did well in the tier list. Let me know what disagreements you have, because everyone's going to have opinions. Someone's going to have a disagreement there. And thank you so much for watching. My name is Home Slice Henry. This is More Slice Henry, my second channel, where I make content primarily related to the Pokemon Go Championship Series, educational content, and content like this that I feel just doesn't fit on the main channel. If you enjoyed watching it, please do leave a like on the video and subscribe to More Slice if you haven't. And I'll see you guys in the next one.